This is Carl Moore from the Desertel Faculty of Management at McGill University. Today I'm delighted to speak to Harvard's Michael Tushman about a recent article he had in the Academy of Management Perspectives on organizational ambidexterity. You and Charles O'Reilly from Stanford are both pioneers in this topic. What brought you to study it in the first place, Michael?
Well, I have, along with Charles, been interested in innovation. And I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, in working with managers, I sort of bumped into the phenomena of managers having to do separate kinds of innovation simultaneously. In the language we now use, and that Jim March had introduced a while ago, that innovation angle, which I've always been interested in, sort of took me through the phenomena to this notion of ambidexterity. How do you build an organization that can simultaneously work on inconsistent types of tasks simultaneously? So that confronting the challenges of managers in the real world having to deal with different kinds of innovation got me interested in organizational architectures to do both. That then led Charles and myself to the ambidexterity concept that had already been introduced by Bob Duncan. And so I was always intrigued by his notion of flipping between organic and mechanistic so many years ago. I don't know what that citation was. So we simply picked up on his idea and don't talk about flipping between organic and mechanistic, but rather an ambidextrous organization is one that can actually operate in both modes simultaneously.
Why do you think this topic's taken off in the literature and produced an enormous amount of research?
I think that this notion of paradox, this notion of contrasting types of activities, I think has struck a chord with managers and researchers, because at some level we're talking about something quite real. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but that's, you know, when I know a good idea when I'm in front of executives or in front of participants in programs that I run, and I introduce an idea or I talk about an idea and they like, wow, go to it. I know I'm onto something. And that's the case with ambidexterity from the get-go.
Towards the end of the article, you mentioned that the concept is a bit fuzzy. How would you and Charles define organizational ambidexterity?
So Charles and I have been pretty consistent. And, you know, one of the issues we raise in our article is ambidexterity is becoming everywhere, and maybe, and that's sort of Julian's argument also, Julian Birkinshaw's argument, that if it's everything, it's probably nothing. So our definition of ambidexterity, Carl, is that it's rooted in structural separation. We call it structural ambidexterity, as opposed to contextual or sort of rhythmic sequencing. And that it's firms that are, or business units or firms that are characterized by high differentiation, that old Lawrence and Lorsch term, targeted, that is low levels of integration, targeted integration, but really strong senior team integration. That's what we mean by structural ambidexterity.
You talk about the importance of leadership, Michael. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the only way this form of organizational architecture can work, because it's rooted in contradiction, it's rooted in building two pieces of an organization that are internally consistent but inconsistent with each other. And the only way that tension can be resolved is through a really strong senior team that can appreciate, live into, deal with contradiction. So that's what we think holds this thing together, is really strong senior teams that can live into contradiction, overarching identity, and a few core values.
What are some of the firms in the world that are better at actually doing this?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the pieces of work that I'm most proud of. Charles and I did a long time engagement through HBS with IBM, and we worked with their executives over maybe a 5-year period and really developed the ideas kind of with them. So I think, up through 2010, then we no longer work with them, but up through 2010, I would have said IBM is sort of the poster child of a firm that knows what this concept is, has a recipe for employing it over and over and over again. That is a true dynamic capability. So Charles and I have written a bunch with Bruce Harold, who was at the time a senior leader at IBM, that really gets at both the concept and its execution.
Michael, you and Charles are two of the top business schools in the world, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. How did you begin to work together?
Yeah, we've been friends and colleagues since graduate school. So I first got to know Charles when I was at MIT and he was at Berkeley, and we were both in charge of our seminars. I was at Sloan, he was at Berkeley, and we invited each other out. So we've been friends for a long time.